Hello, hi folks. If you can please take your seats, we'll start very promptly. How's everyone doing? Good. Thank you for coming out. I know it's a midweek Wednesday in Burnaby. You know, the question is who holds events at this time anyway? And we do, and people show up. So it's a testament to how important some of this subject matter is. So really quickly, I'm just going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about the program today. But before we do that, I wanted to say that we are convening and meeting today on the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Semiahmoo nations, and other Coast Salish nations. We say this not just as a performative representation of the things that have existed in the foregone eras and yesteryear, but rather as a reminder of how intractable and protracted these relationships are. As someone who came here to the unceded territories via the Micmac territories of the East Coast, colonially known as Nova Scotia, I'm constantly having to remind myself of how my presence here is a continuation and an entrenchment of this settler colonial project. Whether we came here 6 months ago or 4 decades ago, we are nevertheless contributing to the further expansion of this project. And it's shocking to say this, but even as we discuss these positions, these points, we also recognize that there is a strong history of settler colonialism in this country that not only refuses to go away, but also rebuffs any possibility of being challenged. And I think that can be quite dangerous. And unfortunately, we are privy to it in so many different ways and in so many different arenas. And the university is by no means immune to those types of conversations. But as we cherish and admire and protect our academic freedom, that freedom comes at a hefty cost. In many instances, it comes at the cost of being able to say difficult things like, we are part of a colonial project. That is much more difficult than saying that this colonial project is fabulous. So, because the prior enforces and demands of us the responsibility to change our ways and not accept the status quo as it stands. In light of that, today's conversation and today's lecture by Dr. Paul Sedra, who I'll introduce momentarily, is very much in line with these larger debates around settler colonialism and the intersections and relationships between those projects here on Turtle Island, as well as in Palestine. My name is Adil Iskandar. I'm the director of the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies here at SFU. And the center is a hub of scholarship and research and programming and activities about Muslim communities and cultures in Muslim-majority countries, but also non-Muslim countries, as well as non-Muslim minorities in those nations and collectives and communities. The center in its mandate, is committed to expanding the framework of what it means to think about and research Muslim communities, societies, and cultures, which means that inadvertently we have to talk about belonging and place and citizenship and many other questions that are very demanding at this particular juncture in time. And no topic is as present and prescient and urgent as the discussion around what is happening in Palestine today. When I say this, I'm not in any way diminishing or undermining or underplaying the vitality, the criticality, and the urgency of other issues and collective causes in the Congo and the Sudan and the Western Sahara, among the Rohingya, among indigenous communities here, all of which are in one way or another being undermined, dehumanized, and victimized and subjugated. But rather, I wanted to highlight the incredible way in which Palestine becomes the epicenter for so many justice issues, whether it's on race and ethnicity, economics, militarization, climate crisis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't take much. You just have to follow your news on any given day. I should also mention technology and various other things. But just following the news on any given day, you'll see how central thinking about Palestine needs to be. Now, when we talk about Palestine, we're not talking about a figure of speech. We're not talking about a proverb. We're talking about a place. And this place is part of a collective memory. It is also a physical material space, which is why the discussion today, or the lecture today, Understanding the Nakba, is a way for us to situate the erased, to memorialize the forgotten, and to bring to the forefront the voiceless individuals and experiences and communities that have for 76 years been buried. So today, I also wanted to say that as part of our commitment as a Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, and given the incredible, not only interest, but the demand on us to continue programming on Palestine, this event is an announcement of the inauguration of a special project on Palestine studies, which allows us to focus our energies on continuing to bring to the forefront programming that is designed specifically on addressing Palestinian culture, society, history, and collective experience. So you'll hear more about that in forthcoming events. So keep following CCMS online or join our mailing list if you want to hear more about it, but expect more from that project. For now, my last order of business is to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Paul Sedra, a friend and colleague and someone who I respect immensely. He's in some distant past. He commented on a presentation that I gave at the Middle Eastern Studies Association back when I was a graduate student, and I'm like, the revered Dr. Paul Sedra is here. So anyway, just wanted to say that I'm honored to be introducing you today. And it is kind of a full circle moment for me as well. So Dr. Paul Sedra is a specialist in modern Egyptian history and Christian Muslim understanding. He has taught at Dalhousie University and the University of Toronto, as well as, of course, here in the Department of History at SFU, and received his doctorate from NYU in January 2006. His most recent book, From Mission to Modernity, Evangelicals, Reformers, and Education in 19th Century Egypt, is published by IB Tauris. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa in International Affairs at Princeton University, Sedra was awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship for study towards his master's degree at Oxford University. His thesis examined the activities of 19th century and Anglican missionaries in Cairo. He returned to the United States once again, as I mentioned, to pursue his PhD in the pioneering joint program in history and Middle Eastern studies, one that has graduated some of the top historians of the region. Sedra is a prolific commentator on contemporary Egypt, Christian-Muslim relations, Canadian policy in the Middle East, and Middle East politics generally. His op-eds have appeared regularly, Mother Muslim. These publications have since been defunct because of a little-known military coup in Egypt. And also generally a popular e-zine on the Middle East. And also he has furnished his analysis to such media outlets as Al Jazeera English, CTV, CBC Radio and Television, the Associated Press, Globe and Mail, and many, many others. Dr. Paul Sedra is also a faculty member here who teaches on a regular basis a course designed specifically to look at and examine and think about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So without further ado, Dr. Paul Sedra.
thanks so much. I have to say that the honor is mine. It's really such an honor. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be able to speak as part of this CCMS event on a subject that is that's very dear to me and very close to my concerns. So thank you very much, Adam. And thanks so much to Kylie Broderick too for arranging everything so ably. I really appreciate it. Today I'm going to speak at length about a trend in Israeli historiography developed by a contingent of scholars known as the New Historians. Now, as a matter of fact, the work of the New Historians is no longer really new. These historians began publishing their findings about 30 years ago. Still, the term New Historians is useful for distinguishing this contingent of scholars from their predecessors in Israel. I'm going to speak about the New Historians at length, not because I agree or disagree with their findings, nor because theirs is the most important or the most compelling or the most interesting contribution to the literature about the emergence of Israel and the Nakba. I will speak about the New Historians at length because they have set the contours for debate, historical debate about what happened in 1948. No credible historian of 1948 can afford to disregard their work. Now, you might quite properly ask, why has Israeli historiography set contours for debate in this area? Haven't Palestinian historians or Arab historians more broadly made significant contributions to the historiography of the Nakba? You might quite properly ask, why has Israeli historiography set the contours for debate? What about Palestinian historians? What about Arab historians of these events? And the answer to that question is that Arab historians, Palestinian historians particularly, have made a tremendous contribution to the historiography of the Nakba. And in fact, long before the New Historians put pen to paper to detail the displacement, the dispossession of Palestinians in 1948, Palestinian scholars like Rosemary Saif and Ibrahim Abdullah were recounting the impact of the Nakba in academic publications like these. What made the New Historians' contribution to this literature, though, distinctive were the sources upon which they were relying. For the first time since the Nakba in the 1980s, scholars managed to secure access to the records and correspondence of the political leaders, the military commanders of the nascent Israeli state. And those documents told a story that contradicted, in nearly every detail, the narrative that Israeli historians had, to that point, developed about the events of 1948. Now, we need a bit of this glossary, we need a bit of vocabulary in order to understand what I'm going to be talking about here. So the mandate is the authority granted by the League of Nations to the British to govern Palestine after the First World War. The Yishuv is the Jewish community of the Palestine Mandate before the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The Haganah was the principal paramilitary organization of the Yishuv, the predecessor to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And perhaps most importantly, Plan Dalet, or Plan D, was a blueprint dated the 10th of March, 1948, that set out how the commanders of the Haganah were to secure territory for and defend the borders of the new Israeli state. So a bit of background. In the wake of the First World War, the Arab nationalist and Zionist movements grew as never before, fueled by the spurious commitments of British officials who administered the area to which the movements laid claim. Zionist leaders initially sought support from the Ottomans, but eventually found their greatest success with the British. Chaim Weizmann. His diplomatic efforts in London culminated in the 1917 Balfour Declaration, which supported the establishment of, quote, a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The British mandate in Palestine, established after the First World War and ostensibly intended to foster self-government in Palestine, relied heavily on local notables for governance. However, the British decision to facilitate Jewish immigration into Palestine undermined the credibility of the British among Arabs. The mandate period saw a significant influx of Jewish immigrants, primarily from Eastern Europe, and this Jewish immigration led to quite a radical shift in the demographics of Palestine. Jews constituted less than a tenth of the population in the area in 1918, but by 1947 they were a third of the population. The Jewish Agency functioned as a de facto government for the issue before the foundation of the State of Israel. They organized education and economic activities. The Haganah, as I mentioned, served as a paramilitary organization, preparing for the eventual establishment of a Jewish state. Arab nationalism in Palestine was initially fragmented, dominated by some notable families like the Husseinis. The British 1930 White Paper, which attempted to restrict Jewish immigration and land purchases, was viewed by both Jews and Arabs as a breach of the mandate. The Peel Commission of 1937 concluded that the mandate was unworkable and recommended partition of the area, a solution that again was rejected by both sides. This series of commissions and of reports undertaken by the British did nothing to ease tensions between the two populations. And so, frustrated by this seemingly unyielding Arab-Jewish conflict and strained by their World War II commitments, the British sought by the 1940s to abandon their responsibilities in Palestine. And those are the circumstances under which we get the partition plan. In 1947, the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 called for the partition of the area into two independent states, one Arab and one Jewish, and the creation of an international administration for Jerusalem. And so an independent Jewish state, Israel, was proclaimed on May 14, 1948. Now, in his article, The Debate About 1948, one of these new historians, a fellow by the name of Avi Shleim, about whom I'll have much to say, he provides a brief sketch of what he calls the traditional view of the 1948 war in Israeli historiography. This is a view that he and his fellow new historians have vehemently opposed. And he really tells it as sort of a David and Goliath story, a Jewish David as opposed to this Arab Goliath. He puts it this way: the infant Jewish state fought a desperate, heroic, and ultimately successful battle for survival against overwhelming odds. During the war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled to the neighboring Arab states, mainly in response to orders from their leaders, and despite Jewish pleas to stay and demonstrate that peaceful coexistence was possible. Okay, so this is Schleim's summary of the traditional account. One could say the account that had been given for many, many years by Israel's old historians, as opposed to the new historians, this new generation of researchers. The most influential attack on these traditional premises was made by historian Benny Morris in his book, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, 1947 to 1949. With that book, Morris managed to shake the foundations, not merely of the Israeli academic establishment, but really of the political establishment as well. That's because in Birth, as I'll describe the book, Morris questions this infancy, the desperation, even the heroism ascribed by this traditional account to the position of Israel in 1948. Notably, he emphasizes the political origins, as he saw them, of this traditional account. In extremely provocative terms, Morris writes, the Israeli official version that the Arabs fled voluntarily, not under Jewish compulsion, and or that they were asked/ordered to do so by their Palestinian and Arab states leaders, helped leave intact the new states, that is Israel's, untarnished image as the haven of a much persecuted people. A body politic more just, moral, and deserving of the West's sympathy and help than the surrounding sea of reactionary, semi-feudal, dictatorial Arab societies. Morris ventures so far as to claim that this official version, or the traditional account, scarcely deserves the label of history at all. In a subsequent essay, Morris argued, Israel's old historians, by and large, were not really historians and did not produce real history. In reality, they were chroniclers, and often apologetic, interested chroniclers at that. They did not work from and upon a solid body of contemporary documentation, and did not normally try to paint a picture that offered the variety of sides of a given historical experience. They worked from interviews and memoirs, and often from memories. They had neither the mindset nor the materials to write real history. So I've quoted these comments at length because they offer as much insight into the mindset of the new historians as of the old. Morris is arguing here for a stark separation between politics and history, for a dispassionate, disinterested mode of writing history. He believes that such a mode of writing history is only within the grasp of historians who rely upon original, written, archival materials as sources. For Morris, interviews and memoirs are inherently tainted sources due to their connection to memory. Morris's work relies almost entirely upon original, written, archival materials, specifically materials drawn from the Israeli state archives. Morris attributes the success of his work to Israel's archives law, which during the 1980s put within his reach foreign ministry papers dating from 1948 to 1957, not to mention documents from the Prime Minister's office. So much for method. What of the contents of these documents? Let's begin with the book that launched Morris's career, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem. From the outset, Morris aims to discredit the argument that the Jewish community of the Palestine Mandate, the Yeshuv, was weaker, less prepared for conflict than the Arab community thereof. To this end, he describes the strength of Israeli political coordination and institutions upon the creation of the state in 1948, relative to that of Palestinian political coordination and institutions. In effect, he argues political coordination and institutions hardly existed within Palestinian society in 1948. Whereas the Jews of Palestine were mobilized through a range of administrative apparatuses prior to 1948, the Arabs of Palestine experienced no comparable mobilization. Morris musters considerable evidence to demonstrate the fragmentation of Palestinian Arab society, evidence that repudiates that David and Goliath narrative, the traditional notions of Israeli infancy and desperation. And here I'm quoting from him. Villages in 1948, and here he's speaking about Palestinian villages, Arab villages. Villages in 1948 often fought and fell alone. The Haganah was able to pick them off one at a time in many districts. In many areas, there was not even defensive cooperation between neighboring villages, since relations between them, as often as not, were clouded by clan or family feuds and rivalry over land. Further, far from characterizing the Israeli War of Independence as a heroic struggle, Morris reveals disturbingly racist views held by parts of the Israeli political and military leadership in 1948. The village should be destroyed completely, and some males from the same village should be murdered, declared the first Haganah order to level a village, issued in January 1948, as quoted by Morris. Cold military calculations, being all Arabs, regardless of their individual loyalties, a fifth column. Such calculations gave rise to, according to Morris, sporadic, deliberate expulsions of Arabs from their homes in Palestine, largely at the behest of individual military commanders. The commanders justified their expulsions for the most part with reference to Plan D, which is a blueprint for securing the emergent Jewish state and the clusters of Jewish settlements outside the state's territory against the expected Arab invasion on or after 15th May 1948. That's how the document describes itself. It is a blueprint for military commanders set forth by the political leadership of the Yishuv. Okay? This is part of Plan D. This is part of the document itself. You can see consolidation of defense systems and fortifications. The following operations must be carried out if the fixed defensive system is to be effective. These comments are particularly worthy of note. The comments here that I've highlighted. Destruction of villages, setting fire to, blowing up, and planting mines in the debris, especially those population centers which are difficult to control continuously. Mounting search and control operations according to the following guidelines. Encirclement of the village and conducting a search inside it. In the event of resistance, the armed force must be destroyed and the population must be expelled outside the borders of the state. Okay. I mean, in an otherwise banal sort of military plan, those words really strike them. The population must be expelled outside the borders of the state. There's been a great deal of controversy surrounding this document since the time that Morris uncovered it. Morris, for his part, suggested that we should not view Plan D as a political blueprint for the expulsion of Palestine's Arabs. He insisted that this was a military document, a planning document that was intended to be used by military commanders on a case-by-case basis, and so he really doubted whether expulsion could be viewed as government policy. There are other historians, notably Palestinian historians, Noura Mashalha is one of them, who have looked at Plan D and said that this is the document that demonstrates that expulsion was the idea from the very beginning. That expulsion was intended, expulsion was part of the plan. Okay? So again, a great deal of controversy surrounding this document. And yet Morris went on. He went on to uncover other documents. He uncovered in a letter written by Ezra Danan, a Haganah intelligence officer, a Jewish agency official and foreign ministry advisor, a quintessential instance of the sort of cold military calculations undertaken at this time. If the commanders believe that by destruction, murder, and human suffering, they will reach their goal more quickly, I would not stand in their way. Morris demonstrates the practical impact of such calculations by pointing to documented accounts of violent expulsion episodes, among them a British account of the 22nd April 1948, revealing the nature of Haganah efforts to consolidate the grip on Haifa. During the morning, they, the Haganah, were continually shooting down on all Arabs who moved both in Wadi Nisnas and the Old City. This included completely indiscriminate and revolting machine gun fire and sniping on women and children, attempting to get out of Haifa through the gates into the docks. But perhaps what's most shocking, what's most remarkable about Morris's account is what he has to say about David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was the inaugural prime minister of the State of Israel. Ben-Gurion is sort of the State of Israel personified in many ways. He is a representative of that period of time. The war of Israelis describe it as the War of Independence, and Ben-Gurion is very much at the forefront of people's memories of that time. And Morris frequently impugns Ben-Gurion's image in significant ways by quoting directly from cabinet meetings. For instance, comments made by Ben-Gurion in the late 1930s, quoted by Morris, are particularly damning. "We must expel the Arabs and take their places. I support compulsory transfer. I don't see in it anything immoral. We want to get closer to the events." In June of 1948, a cabinet meeting in Israel, "We should prevent their peace-minded refugees' return. We must settle Jaffa. Jaffa will become a Jewish city. I will be for them not returning after the war." Now, what makes Morris's work so fascinating and so compelling, really devastating, is that he often uses documents that were generated within the Israeli Defense Forces themselves and were never intended to see the light of day. Documents that were intended entirely for internal consumption. Intelligence reports, for instance. The IDF generated a report, for instance, which indicated that in November of 1947, there had existed 219 Arab villages and 4 Arab towns in the areas that were allotted to the Jewish state under the UN partition plan. And those 219 Arab villages and 4 Arab towns had a population, an Arab population, of 342,000. By the first day of June of 1948, no fewer than 180 of the 219 villages and 4 towns were empty. That is 239,000 Arabs of the 342,000 who had lived in those areas had departed. Now, of course, the critical question is why? What were the circumstances under which they left? Why had the Arabs left? Why had they fled? Keep in mind that the traditional Israeli historiography suggests that the Arabs left largely on the orders of their own political leaders. Well, according to Morris, the IDF report, which was drafted almost contemporaneously with these events, and here I'm quoting Morris, cites surprise, protracted mortar barrages, and use of loudspeakers, broadcasting threatening messages as factors which had a strong influence in precipitating flight. These were mortar barrages and threatening messages directed at the Arabs by the forces of the issue. Further, Morris argues that the report plainly and bluntly contradicts the traditional Israeli historiography by suggesting that, quote, Arab orders to evacuate villages were restricted to a number of areas, were guided by local strategic considerations, and affected no more than 10% of the Palestinian refugee population. Indeed, the IDF report makes the important point that the Arab Higher Committee and neighboring Arab states, far from encouraging flight, actually wanted the Palestinians to stay in their homes, wanted them to remain on that territory. And so Morris really sort of gives the line to the traditional narrative, to the traditional historiography. To this point, we've looked largely at discussions held within the issue as to how to deal with the challenge of building an independent Jewish state. But the new historians have much to say as well about the discussions that the leaders of the issue held with their Arab neighbors, and about the strategies that these neighbors devised to deal with the emergence of Israel. Here we return to the work of Avi Shleim, again a new historian, many years a professor at Oxford. Shleim has written at length of the particular relationship between the Yishuv and this man, King Abdullah of Transjordan, what was then called Transjordan, now just Jordan. He was the son of the Sharif Hussein, a very significant Arab leader at the time of the First World War. Like his father, Abdullah had ambitions that extended well beyond those that the British would allow him to realize. Both he and the leaders of the Yishuv grasped that a secret accommodation between them, between Jordan, the kingdom of Transjordan, and the Yishuv, could serve their respective interests. And Shleim recounts, for Abdullah, the Zionists represented a potential source of support for realizing his dream of Greater Syria. For the Zionists, Abdullah offered a means of breaking the chain of Arab hostility that surrounded them on all sides. Accordingly, Abdullah reached a deal with the leaders of the Yishuv a mere 12 days before the United Nations would convene to discuss partition in November of 1947. Representing the Yishuv was Golda Meir, who would herself become Prime Minister of Israel. According to Shleim, Abdullah told Meir that he wanted Arab Palestine for himself. That is to say, he wanted to annex Arab Palestine to the Kingdom of Transjordan. Abdullah was keen to know how the Zionist leadership would respond to such a move. And Meir's response was auspicious, to say the least, as long as Abdullah avoided military conflict with the forces of the Yishuv and acceded to the UN partition plan, the state of Israel would not object to the king's plans for annexation. Hence, the Arabs appear in Shleim's account, his revisionist account of the emergence of the state of Israel, the Arabs appear far less intransigent than they appear in the traditional Israeli historiography. This comes through perhaps most forcefully in Shleim's discussion of the negotiations that followed the 1948 war. According to Shleim, an important factor in the failure to proceed from armistice agreements to contractual peace agreements was Ben Gurion's inflexibility, rather. Shleim proceeds to speak to the roots of this inflexibility based upon discussions that Ben-Gurion had with his cabinet in May of 1949. In the first place, with the passage of time, the world would get used to Israel's existing borders and forget about the UN borders and the UN idea of an independent Palestinian state. Similarly, in respect to the Palestinian refugees, Israel's position continued to improve despite moral pressure from the UN to allow them to return. The same was true of Jerusalem. People were getting used to the existing situation and beginning to see the absurdity of the idea of suddenly establishing an international regime over the city. At this point, let's review some of the principal points that the new historians have made in attacking the traditional Israeli historiography. First, contrary to the traditional claims that the Zionist forces were vastly outnumbered by their Arab foes, the new historians have argued that, in fact, throughout the conflict, exactly the opposite was the case. Exactly the opposite. Now, we're not speaking about a Jewish David and an Arab Goliath. We're speaking about an Arab David and a Jewish Goliath. Okay? The IDF had 35,000 troops facing only 25,000 Arab troops in May of 1948. By July of 48, the IDF figure had reached 65,000, and by December, the IDF had over 96,000 troops. And these numbers significantly outpaced whatever numbers the Arabs were able to muster. Second, contrary to traditional claims that war was brought by the Arabs to the Yishuv, the new historians have argued that long before hostilities had begun, Ben-Gurion remained convinced that military conflict was inevitable. Third, contrary to the traditional claims that the Arabs, both within Palestine and abroad, were consistently hostile to the notion of a Jewish state, the new historians have argued that in the conflict's initial months, the Haganah was largely responsible for provoking the local population into hostilities against Jews, and that subsequently whatever attacks Abdullah mounted on Palestinian territory were intended merely to support his own territorial ambitions. They were not directed against the Jewish state. And finally, contrary to traditional claims that the Arabs scuttled opportunities for a peace settlement offered to them by the State of Israel after the 48 War, the new historians have argued that, quite apart from the Jordanians, the Egyptians and even the Syrians had developed serious peace proposals involving, in the latter case, the absorption of Palestinian refugees, which is quite extraordinary. But they were rebuffed in their secret overtures to the Israelis by a prime minister, Ben-Gurion, who felt that delay was to Israel's advantage. I opened this talk by suggesting that with or without the benefit of the documents unearthed by the new historians, Palestinian historians and Palestinians generally have never stood silent in the face of the persistent efforts to erase them and their community. Despite the tremendous material disadvantage they have faced as a people forced into exile, and the quite literal targeting of their libraries, of their archives by Israeli forces, Palestinians have written very eloquently about the Nakba, about their experience of the implementation of Plan D. Just as importantly, they have powerfully refuted the pernicious lie that Palestine was a land without a people by offering powerful testimony about the vibrancy of Palestinian communities before 1948. Among the historians who have contributed to this effort are Bishara Dumani, whose history of Jabal Nablus during 18th and 19th centuries is among the most haunting evocations of place in all of Middle Eastern studies. And of course, Rashid Khalidi, whose account of the the rise of modern Palestinian nationalism remains indispensable, both to the specialist and to the general reader. But I want to close by discussing a third text edited by the eminent Palestinian historians Salim Tamari and Issam Nassar. Tamari and Nassar have published the memoirs of a Jerusalem musician by the name of Wasif Jawahariya, and this remarkable work gives us a rare window into the everyday lives of Palestinians before the Nakba, before the catastrophe. Now I want to close with a quote from the historians. Jawahariya describes the feast of Easter, Pesach, as an occasion for joint Muslim, Christian, and Jewish celebrations. He details the Muslim processions of Palm Sunday, which proceeded from the Abrahamic Mosque in Hebron toward Jerusalem. Jawahariya recalls the festival of Nabi Musa as a Muslim popular celebration that merged with the Christian Orthodox Easter. The Fantasia of Sabt al-Nur, Fire Saturday, commemorating the resurrection of Christ, was the greatest popular Christian celebration in Palestine and was closely coordinated with Muslim folk festivals. Christian and Muslim youths in Jewish neighborhoods celebrated Purim. This is now a lost world. Okay? This is a lost world. And it's a world that the Nakba put beyond our reach. Thanks very much. Just a few suggestions now for further reading for those who might be interested in looking further at these issues. Rashid Khaledi's book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, is a marvelous history of settler colonialism in Palestine. Ilan Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, is also a go-to text about 1948 and beyond. Avi Shleim's book, The Iron Wall, is again a remarkable text on relations between Israel and the Arab states. And if you want to understand what's happening now, right now, on Gaza, Hamas, the background to the current crisis, Tariq Bakoni's book, Hamas Contained, is a superb work. I would say it's a must-read work for those who want to understand the dynamics between Hamas and Israel and the history of that relationship and the background to what is happening today. Okay, thanks very much.